Great agus fáilte ród go dtí on LiR Confidential or lirmedia.tv and our usual email info@lirmedia.tv pertains, and I'm delighted to have in studio this morning Séighin O'Ceallaigh. Good morning, Séighin, and welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Pat.
Now, Séighin is a writer from an editor from Limerick, and he's a former politician, and he served one term in Limerick City and County Council, and also served for a year as chairman of the Cultural Committee. I suppose we start there, Séighin. How did you find local politics yourself? I mean, you spent one term, which is 5 years, isn't it? It's a long time in one way, but how did you find the whole thing, the whole process, if you like?
I suppose it's really interesting. I think no matter how much you look in from the outside in terms of politics, when you're actually in there, there's just no comparison. There's been involved in so many different aspects of it, right from the high level decision making down to the small local issues and absolutely everything in between. So it was definitely an experience, and look, it had its ups and downs, but I definitely enjoyed my time in politics.
And do you think that I live in County Clare, which is not far away, so I'm quite familiar with the setup. Do you think it was a mistake to amalgamate the county with the city?
I think it was a combination of the amalgamation and the massive cuts to the number of local representatives. So you have my own part here in East Limerick that's the size of County Louth, with only 7 public representatives. And you've other parts, you can see Limerick City and County then, they only have 6, which is, it's not a lot of representation for a local authority and for a council. So I think that kind of combined with the amalgamation and I suppose the changes that were going on politically around 2014, 2015, that kind of time as well. It definitely there should have been more autonomy given to the local areas, I think, because there were many meetings where you had politicians from East Limerick discussing roads, potholes, lights in West Limerick, 50, 60 miles from them,
Yeah, I understand the nuts and bolts of the thing, but do you think councils in general and have enough powers because the county manager and the permanent staff, not making any negativity on them, they seem to have all the power. The councils can only, I suppose, go cap in hand many times. That dynamic should be more balanced, do you think?
To a certain degree, but I think as well that the councillors have more power than they kind of let on. There's a lot of situations where there's a lot, it's similar with the government in Neffet. The government is allowing Neffet to make decisions and take the blame because politically it's a safe maneuver. It's the same with the local authority that local council are saying, oh, county manager won't do that, when realistically they've quite a bit of power to get things done. But it's easy enough to pass the blame onto someone in a permanent job that isn't up for re-election, rather than for local politicians to accept blame at budget time or at council meetings.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Now, the other thing is the elected mayor, before we get on to yourself, the elected mayor was supposed to happen this year. Of course, the year isn't over yet, because the people voted for it. Now, do you think the present government are going to ignore that vote?
I don't know if I'd use the word ignore, but I can't see it happening this year with everything that's going on. And then we're into 2022, and then we'll see what happens in 2022. And they might say, look, sure, there's a council election in 2024. Why don't we push it out till then altogether? My own opinion of what could happen.
Well, I never thought of that, actually. You're dead right. There's local elections, 2024. Well, because, I'll be too old altogether then. I won't run it all in 2024, But anyway, I'm speaking to Séighin O'Ceallaigh here, our special guest this morning on LiR Confidential on LiRmedia.tv. And don't forget to press the red button to subscribe to our channel. Now, Séighin has a new novel, his first novel, debut novel, coming out this month. But before we get to that novel, you graduated from UL in history and Gaeilge, obviously. And you remember Sinn Féin, aren't you?
Yeah, I remember Sinn Féin, yeah.
And I suppose, I don't know what to say in that Robert Byrne and the Limerick Soviet. Now, an awful lot of people know bits and pieces about that, How did you come to that, Séighin, Robert Byrne and the Limerick Soviet? Or see, in your opinion, is he a figure that's forgotten about in many cases?
He certainly was anyway prior to 2019, the centenary year, and it's an awful thing that in Ireland, a lot of our history, it needs to happen, say, on the 10th anniversary or 50th anniversary before people kind of pay attention. And this time around, it was the 100th anniversary. But it actually goes further back than that. The local branch of Sinn Féin was named the Robert Byrne Common of Sinn Féin, and the first commemoration in a long time held by the party for Robert Byrne took place in 2015. So we'd kind of a few years built up kind of before the centenary anniversary came around of the Soviet. So I suppose I'd an interest in that period of Limerick history. One of my special areas would have been the Tan War, Civil War, and kind of events around the start of the 20th century, the first half. So I would have had read quite a bit about it. And I suppose when I was in college, I had actually done part of an essay on Robert Byrne's hunger strike in medical history. So I had quite a bit done, and 2018 kind of came around then and decided to have a book ready for the following year for the centenary event.
And that's still available, is it, Séighin?
Yeah, I believe it's still available in local bookshops, the Celtic Bookshop, Key Books, and O'Mahony's Bookstore, and the Crescent Bookstore as well. Local bookshops took it, so I'm not 100% sure if it's still there, but I know there were definitely a few copies still around those.
We're talking about Robert Byrne and the Limerick Soviet, all history buffs, local history buffs with the Robert Byrne. Where was he from, Séighin?
He was from the middle of Dublin City, but his mother was a Limerick woman, one of the Hurleys, her name was, and they moved back down after the death of Robert's father, and he became very active in Limerick then and would have been very familiar with the Dailies and Tom Clark, two very notable Republican figures in Limerick City.
So Robert Byrne and the Limerick Soviet, and my special guest is Séighin O'Ceallaigh here on the thing. Are you a Republican with a capital or a small R? Or if you know what I mean, if you follow my
I do a Republican with a capital R. I have no problem in saying that at all.
Because there was a time if you admitted to being a Republican, you were shunned or treated as some kind of an outcast, which was a shame, really, because it's an integral and part of our history. When I went to school at my age group, our history stopped at 1916. So we had no more, except you took an interest yourself in it, which was a pity, really, the way it was taught, But
even not too long ago, when I was in school, like it was very similar, that you'd have a bit about 1916, and it kind of went to World War II, Vietnam War, and very little spoken about Irish history afterwards then. And that was only 10, 15 years ago. That is still not quite as in-depth as it should be, really. You look at events like the Soviet and like the Spanish Civil War that the vast majority of Irish people wouldn't be aware of.
That's right. I mean, I didn't hear about Frank Ryan until I went to one of the Historical Society talks. I mean, they're fantastic groups. I know the Limerick Historical Society with Tom Denham and Tony Brown are doing a regular program here with us. And the amount of stuff I've learned myself out of that, not because they're associates, because of the figures, very important figures in history that I never heard of. Now, a lot of that is my own fault, but nevertheless, the historical societies, whether they're in Limerick are, I suppose, societies that should be well supported and resourced as well, because the amount of work they do, the amount of information they put out there, the amount of books they produce, periodicals and journals, is just fantastic. And there should be more attention paid to it, you know. That's my opinion. I'm sure you'd share that as well, Shane, yourself.
Well, of course, I know that it's not as simple as just typing words on pages to get history books done. For every hour of writing you do, you probably do 3 hours of research.
Absolutely, without a shadow, without, I know, looking into small things myself to do with music. It takes a couple of hours, you know, to find out information. And when you're giving out information, as you know, it has to be accurate, number one, and you have to have a reference for it as well. Now, that was Robert Byrne and the Limerick Soviet, and then you went on to, from Glencar to Glantine, the Liam Scully story. Tell us about that, Shane.
I suppose it's kind of a local story in that Liam Scully was an IRA volunteer from Kerry, but he actually gave his life at the Battle of Kilmallock. And again, that was a centenary book released last year. But I'll be honest and say myself that it wasn't a character that I would have particularly known anything about really, other than hearing the name, because like Robert Byrne, Liam Scully has a common named after him in West Limerick, and it was only looking into him that I realised that he'd played a very significant role in the Irish Republican movement from 1916 and even beforehand, and then came to Limerick and played a part in a number of raids, ambushes, attacks, and definitely was right in the thick of it. And a very interesting character that definitely very few people would have heard of.
That's very true indeed, and that book is still available, lad. So that's another book for you. Plenty of reading to do by the time we come to the end of this program. Anyway, Shane, there's no doubt about that. But do you think, myself? I mean, do you think that obviously I'm not dismissing the pandemic and COVID as anything? Of course, is a very serious virus and all. But I really think that it's a cover for the present government not to do a whole lot of celebrations, not to do a whole lot of highlighting of these most important events in our history, particularly this year, 1921, and next year, 1922. Do you think they're what's the word I'm looking for now to be kind to them? It's a very low-key approach they're taking, and under the cover of COVID. That'll be my reading of it.
Look, I don't know what's going on through their heads, but it's, I suppose, a lot of frustration at the moment, particularly after Féile there at the weekend, where people gathered in the Falls Park in Belfast in their thousands for concerts. I'm a massive boxing fan myself, so Michael Conlan was fighting and a number of other Irish boxers. But yet, we're not allowed to have over 50 people outside. Now that turns out to be 200 that nobody knew, bar Leo Varadkar and Catherine Zapone.
That's right.
We're allowed to have 200.
Convenient.
Yeah, very convenient. Yeah.
And I was in Croke Park. I was in Croke Park on Sunday at the Cork Kilkenny match, where 24,000 people were allowed in. You know. But I don't know why the place wasn't full. But that's just my reading of the thing. And I met Kelly Harrington's dad and son and brother Sunday morning early, because up there early to meet them, to say hello to them, get a photograph with them, you know. But it's fantastic. But I presume you saw the fight, the Kelly Harrington fight.
Not live. The Japanese time didn't really suit me too much. No, but no, I watched it afterwards. It was a tough fight. Now, two very good boxers, and great that Kelly took home the gold. And a pity that a boxer who lives so close to Croke Park couldn't have a civic reception or a mayoral reception. I'm sure,
Shane, there's no doubt in my mind, if they were a member of any other party or group, heaven and hell will be moved from. and I thought it was appalling of our government. But I know the good people of Portland Road where she is, and just having chatted to 20 or 30 of them on Sunday morning, I had plenty of time to talk to them. I mean, for the Lord Mayor not to host a civic reception for herself and her family, I mean, we don't win many gold medals in this country, as you know, I don't have to tell you, and not to host a civic reception in the Mansion House for her family, her immediate family, was absolute shocking in my book. You know?
No, definitely. And as well for Aidan Walsh, bronze medalist in the boxing as well, who suffered an injury, unfortunately. Belfast boxer should have been welcomed back to Dublin Airport like any other Irish athlete, no matter what medal it was. And definitely there should have been.
I'm just wondering, Shane, before we forget, was the Lord Mayor in the airport to meet her?
I don't know. I don't know the situation.
That's the green one. Is that the green Lord Mayor, or has she gone out of office?
I think it's still her, but she could be running for any number of elections at the moment now, from what I gather. But I think it's the name escapes me now.
Ellen Chu.
Yeah. I believe it's still her anyway. I suppose it's around that time of year when mayors exchange change now at this stage.
And you know, just to be totally cynical about it, should they could have had that bash at the Marion Hotel. You know what I mean? There'd be no problems, because the Attorney General said there's no problem here, lads. Nothing to see. So wouldn't they be flying? I think we'll book it for her, the creator. But anyway, I think what goes on in this country sometimes, Shane, is just you really wring your hands at it. There's no words for it now. Séighin O'Ceallaigh is our special guest here on LiR Confidential, lirmedia.tv. And our email is info@lirmedia.tv, and don't forget to press the red button on the right hand side. Subscribe to our channel, and we're fantastic. We've gone over the 500 subscribers, so we're heading now towards the next 500. 1,000 is our next thing. So it's important you look at the program. It doesn't matter what you think of it. We don't mind what you say about the program, but share it when you see it as well. Anyway, Shane, getting back now to, how long is this novel, or the new novel coming out at the end of the month, is The Half Mile Road by Séighin O'Ceallaigh. How long was this in your head before it got down between the covers, as they say?
Very, very short time. I was actually working on something else, and it was like a light bulb moment that I was working on something more historical, and this is something completely temporary, set somewhere within a month to a couple of years from now, politically. So it really just came to a stage where I just had an idea, stopped what I was doing, and drove to the other side of the country to actually have a look at the place that I was setting the book, all within a couple of days. So it really didn't take long for creating it. It was just one that came to my head and thought it was a really good idea, and just went with it.
And that stretch of road, for people viewing it, where is that located?
It's just between the border between Fermanagh and Monaghan. It's, as the title suggests, it's a half mile of this like little country road, grass grown up the middle of it, fields either side, and half a mile is in Monaghan, and it's surrounded either side by Fermanagh. So this book looks at, well, there's so much talk of hard border, hard Brexit, maybe not as much at the moment with the pandemic and everything, but it's still something that's, yeah, 100%. So it looks at what would happen if the hard border was imposed, and little roads like this could be closed, as they have been done previously by the British government, particularly during the 80s and 90s.
Well, they were closed. I was in the army from 69 to 74, and we did a lot of border duty, and after those roads were closed, I was certainly patrolled on this side and the other side. We met our contemporaries on the other side of the British Army, but I mean, people don't, and it's not so very long ago, when there's a huge military presence all along the border, both from our side and from the other side. So people don't realize that it's not so long ago, and You can understand people living there, of course, it's a different reality for them. I mean, as you said, all those little roads could be closed, every one of them.
Yeah, it's a possibility that hopefully it never comes to, but I think it's worth noting the seriousness of these negotiations and how this plays out between the EU and the UK, because there can be serious consequences for everyone right across the island.
Do you not agree, Séighin, that the Brexit situation pertaining to the 6 counties has brought into stark focus the fact of assimilation back into the natural habitat of the 6 counties into the Republic? Doesn't that sharpen the minds of a lot of people, and doesn't it bring back into the reality? There's no need for this carry on anymore. It should be all one country.
Well, I think that the conversation needs to happen, and I think the border itself is definitely a focus on this book, whether you agree politically, disagree politically. I think geographically you have to say this is ridiculous, because when you look at a little country road that it goes from Fermanagh, back into Fermanagh over the course of 1.5 miles, and you have a half mile of it completely isolated. It just doesn't make sense. You look at any other country, like, that if you put a border where it was just crossing roads left, right and centre, it would look at being changed. And it was in the early 1920s, after the ceasefire negotiations, it was looked at, but no agreement could be made to smooth it out. And it was kind of left with geographical features being the border, and it's a stream. It couldn't be more than 2 foot wide, that cuts through the road, and that's what the border is, rather than any bit of kind of sense to it. And I think it brings to light that a lot of people just know crossing in by Newry or up into Derry or Enniskillen, but there are actually a lot more border crossings that people just wouldn't be familiar with.
It's a normal day-to-day, because I have family living up in Dundalk, and it's no big deal to drive up to Newry, to drive down the road. It's a normal journey for all of those people on both sides. So I mean, as you said, the Brexit thing hasn't gone away, to borrow a cliche, and I think that certainly there should be a lot more discussion on it. We cannot put everything on the back burner because of COVID. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's a country to run, there's an economy to run, there's people in dire straits, there's businesses gone to the wall. I don't have to tell you, Séighin, walking around Limerick City, the dereliction in Limerick City, to me, as is in other towns, and I go down to visit my dad in Mallow, the dereliction is appalling, and the empty buildings. I don't know, Séighin, are people noticing these anymore?
I don't know. I suppose they're there for so long, and there'll probably be more there with post-COVID, with this new idea of working from home. A lot of people won't have any reason to go into the city centre, and you may see more businesses close and more dereliction. Because I suppose a failure to adapt, and I suppose people's new way of living, that if people are living from home, maybe the shops will come closer to them, into the suburbs and the shopping centre, rather than the city centre. Look, we don't know what the future holds, but definitely a lot of people that I've been talking to have been saying that they hope to, get to continue work from home. They much prefer it.
Yes, some will to suit some. There's no doubt about it. But what about all the drive for the load of office blocks anyway? So the Half Mile Road we're talking about with Séighin O'Ceallaigh, his debut novel, The Half Mile Road, will be out very soon, and we put a link up after the show anyway, Séighin, for that as well. And you can email us on the information when it comes out, so that we'll get a few swords for you.
Thanks very much.
But obviously, with telling any story like that, you bring it down to the human level, and you bring it down to a farmer, really. You bring down to make it human, and to make it the story for people like ourselves. A farmer who's caught up in the middle of a crisis without giving so much away. And how did you come by, to formulate that kind of plot, if you follow my drift?
I suppose there's there's no other profession that would have suited the book, I think, to be honest. If you know the kind of border area around Monaghan, it is mostly farming, and like this the same, you know, right across rural Ireland. It's a lot of it is farmers that are keeping local economies alive, as there's very little other employment opportunities in rural Ireland. So, and as well, it's, as is the case with a lot of farmers along the border, the farm is on both sides. So it's in Fermanagh and it's in Monaghan, and it kind of looks at that aspect of it as well, because, you know, these farms existed long before the border existed. You know, these fields, these divides were there long beforehand. So you have so many farms divided. You have so many farmhouses, sheds, houses themselves that the border cuts right through. So I thought it was appropriate.
Didn't Arlene Foster grow up in Fermanagh?
Yes.
And she would be very familiar with it. I mean, an awful lot of politicians like Arlene Foster and people, obviously they have a persona in their role as, say, when she was leader of the DUP, and they have certain rules and regulations to go by. But on a human level, I think I actually like her on a human level, you know, outside of politics. She's a very pragmatic person, you know.
Yeah, especially after she stood down as DUP leader, she's certainly come across as a lot more of a friendly character.
Oh yeah, I mean, she's great neighbours. She's an awful lot of friends in the nationalist stroke Republican community, you know, and they have good regard for her in parts of the north. So I think she'll be missed out of the politics. You know, we all have, you know, look, we don't have to agree with political views of everybody to respect them for their, I suppose, their human carry on and the way they hold themselves. You know, but she struck me as a person who would have been good in the long run for the DUP. But look, that's politics for you, as they say, you know. What about Sinn Féin themselves now in government here, Shane? Obviously, they were excluded from government by the machinations of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and the Greens the last time, you know. That's so be it. They're the numbers. It's a numbers game at the end of the election. But do you think the party themselves have lost their way a bit in opposition?
No, I wouldn't think so. You know, I can appreciate how tough it must be in opposition during the pandemic, especially at the start, because you know, there were very few sittings of the Dáil. It was done remotely, so it was just, especially the news timeline, it was just the government making decisions. And I suppose, you know, in a pandemic, you know, you're certainly limited on interactions, and hopefully soon the Dáil will be back open. But even in the convention centre, you know, we have been a strong opposition, I believe, up there. But I suppose it's
Sinn Féin, to me, I'm a voter for them in the last election. I have to admit that here on the program, but I'm just saying that they don't have to agree 100% with every piece of legislation and those appalling pieces of legislation that passed there recently. Surely there has to be questioning.
Oh, I'd say if you sat down and watched all TV for the day, you'd see plenty of it. It's what makes it onto the 6-1 news for 3 or 4 seconds. That's a different story altogether.
I agree with you there, yeah.
You know, I think there's
I've seen some of the debates. I mean, they didn't even question the logic of going across the border to Fermanagh to a GA match where 500 people could go in, cross the border, and nobody was left in. They didn't even question the science. There's no science behind that, and there's no logic. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, look, I suppose different jurisdictions, different governments as well. That and I suppose a different, rollout of a plan in the 6 counties compared to in the rest of the country. You know, but like I completely get you. But again, I think that's more of a border issue rather than a government issue. Again, coming back to the border, that why is it safe for Auckland to play a GA game, but not safe for North Monaghan, you know,
Or
club.
Knockaderry or someone like that, yeah.
No, yeah, no, like, but then you look at places then like that had very high cases, like Belfast, you know, where you'd say, right, it makes sense that we try not to do, you know, go to places where there's high cases. Same with Dublin, Donegal, where there were high cases. You know,
Yeah.
but I mean, I don't envy people having to make decisions or call out decisions.
I
At the
don't, I
moment,
mean,
you're probably damned if you do and you're damned if you don't,
yeah,
because you look at
I
Christmas.
don't care what decisions one way they make, provided there's science behind it and logic behind it. Certainly science. If there's a science has to go hand in hand with the truth, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. You know, I don't get it myself. You know, the whole idea of that, and I don't know myself really at this stage. I mean, you have the silly situation where you can't have a fish and chips inside in a restaurant except you're vaccinated, and the people who are serving you are not vaccinated. That's what I'm talking about. Stupid science, Shane. I mean,
Yeah.
you and I can't go into the Savoy tonight. Not that we be high dining for our meal, except we're vaccinated, and we say we are. All the people serving us are not vaccinated. What's that about?
Well, I suppose hopefully it won't be too much longer.
That's what I mean about nuances in opposition. There's no questioning. I've listened to all politicians on the radio shows and all, you know, really, there's no challenge put up. Okay, you have a
Well, I
decision.
suppose it depends on what side of the argument you want to position yourself on, because, as I say, you look at last Christmas when everyone was saying, open up, you know, people want to come home from abroad for Christmas, we want to do Christmas shopping, and then the country was opened up, and then cases went absolutely through the roof and we had to close back down again, and people were complaining then. The same people who were saying open up were saying we shouldn't have opened up. You know, everyone wants to be right about everything always.
Well, well, at this stage of the game, anyway, we're way behind the curve. I will suddenly be over in Germany. We're way behind the curve with every other country now, and that's not fair on the people and the economy and all in a general level. I don't think so, Shane. We're way behind the curve. You know?
Well, I think it just, you know, goes to show, I think Mariongate showed a lot there that, you know, where there's a will, there's a way. You know, if there'd have been 900 at the party, there'd have been 900 people allowed at outdoor events. You know, if there was 3,000 at the party, 3,000 would have been allowed outdoors.
But, you know, on a general note as well, as we're talking about, I know we're saying a bit, but there doesn't seem to be any consequences for people of certain positions and in this country for doing things like that. No consequences. There's a lady down in West Cork who was put into jail by some judge. I forget his name now. If I had his name, I'd say it was because she wasn't wearing a mask in a shop. This is nonsense. And yet you have judges at Golfgate, you have the great and the good at Mariongate, you have all the RTE crawling knees up in the canteen. Does it depend who you are and what kind of job you're in? There's no law for you.
I suppose it's definitely a more nuanced one there, because from what I recall, this case in Cork, there was more to it, that it was the way behaviour and acting towards staff, and, you know.
Well, that's just opinion. That's just words and opinion.
There's words and opinion, but, you know, I've often seen footage where people are violently shouting peaceful protests, like, you know, saying peaceful protests and being violent. Come here, they don't go together. Like, you can say one thing and do another. But it goes the same with the government. Like, if there are rules broken, then there should be guarded investigations. People should be stepping down, regardless. And we did see people stepping down in Golfgate. All right, but, you know, I'll agree with you. There wasn't the same criminal investigation that there would have been if they'd have been a communion party or a christening party.
Yeah, but you're dead right there, Shane. In Golfgate, people stepped down for being a minister. They're still a TD. If I was caught in Golfgate and I was working a job, would I have to resign from my job?
Yeah, very likely, I suppose. Like, it wouldn't just be a demotion.
They're still TDs. They're still judges. There's a judge now that was at Golfgate. He's still getting his pay for doing nothing.
Yeah, and there were bankers there from what I
Yeah,
recall as well that still haven't
yeah,
been named.
in Bank of Ireland, yeah.
We've only heard about what 7 or 8 names out of the whatever 100 people that were there, and it's the same at Marion Gate. We've only heard
That's
3 or 4 names with the Green Party.
We'll have to supply all the staff now in these hotels with good cameras, good iPhones in future, so that they'll be able to keep tabs on them all. My special guest is Séighin O'Ceallaigh on LiR Confidential here on lirmedia.tv, and our email is info@lirmedia.tv. We're looking forward to the debut novel, The Half Mile Road by Séighin, which is due out this month. And also the other 2 books we touched on, from Glencar to Glantine, the Liam Scully story, and also Robert Byrne and the Limerick Soviet. The principles of the Limerick Soviet, before we finish up, Séighin, the principles of the Limerick Soviet was a good one.
It's a lot more complicated, I suppose, in terms of principles, because you definitely have conflicting groups that were running the Soviet together. Say you the Republican movement and you the Labour movement, and then you those who were kind of both, and you had some who were kind of very staunchly one or the other. So, like, the Soviet is more a nickname. It was a general strike against the military curfew imposed on Limerick, and the principles were, I suppose, liberty. I suppose you could probably put it in a broad sense like that, and then break it down to where some people had a more left view of it, other people had a more nationalist and self-autonomous view of it, and some people, I suppose, then were Republican, as in they had that left view and nationalist view. So there are a lot of different groups at play coming together because they were taking on the British Army, so you couldn't have infighting or splinter groups when you're taking on, that was then the strongest military in the world.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But certainly if nothing else, it made an impact anyway. And I only heard the name, the Limerick Soviet. I lived in Cork before I moved down here. But when I moved down here, I realized the whole history of it was that thing. Of course, we're good for that thing. We coined the phrase boycott, Captain Boycott, before all those years ago, and that was extremely effective.
Yeah.
I think that inspired a lot of people, including Mahatma Gandhi, the silent, non-violent protests, that sprung out of that ideology,
Yeah, it would have this was the civil rights movement in the USA as well, where they would have boycotted the buses, where they weren't allowed sit at the front. That was definitely a major point of that as well.
Yeah. Tell me, have you any? Will we see you again? Will we see your name on posters again in any shape, form soon? What do you think? Down the line?
Maybe down the line at some stage. Look, who knows? You never say never, but it could be quite a while down the line, and that's not a definite yes by any means either.
And overall, Séighin, those 5 years, I mean, did you enjoy those 5 years? That's a stupid question, but did you enjoy the 5 years?
I did, yeah. It was tough work, but it was work worth doing.
And it's true to say that it's 7 days a week, days and nights, because as you said, when your phone rings, I mean, those are people who voted for you or potentially could vote for you again anyway. So is there that compulsion? What I'm saying is not to be off duty. I don't mean to sound like that, but you know what I mean? Is it a continuous?
There's definitely that culture there, and it's not a healthy one. I would try to set my own hours, to have a bit of structure there. But I've heard of people taking calls in the middle of the night, and that is not good for your mental health. That is not. There's no other job that you'd be expected to do that in, and if you were, there'd be protests held outside. But it seems to be the only job where you're expected to throw workers' rights out the window, and it could be any hour of the night. You could be out in a pub at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're expected to sit down and listen to someone's problem. That as you say, it is all the time, but people, regardless parties, they need to pull it back a bit. because
Yeah.
you do see it does have a massive effect on people, and you do see people they run for one term, that's it, they wouldn't even think of running for a second
Yes,
term.
that is very true. That's very true. I know from talking to different people, I know myself, you have to turn off your phone
Mm,
or have a special phone for your constituency work, a
yeah,
phone, a mobile phone for your constituency work, where it's on all day and the evening and then it's off at night. I don't know. But I mean, um, so that was now you were the chairman. I just touched on something because I mean, in the light of COVID, because a lot of my friends, I'm interested in jazz society and all of that, all music and entertainment for a long time. But you're chairman of the cultural committee.
mm.
Is there a lot of lip service paid to culture in general, or do people strive to do their best on small budgets?
Oh no, it's lip service. Trust me. From that position, I suppose it was my duty to argue at budget time for more funding for culture, arts, events, that kind of thing. And God, they cut it asunder. You know,
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know whether that was because there was a Shinner in charge of this committee or what it was like. But yeah, no, even during my year, like I saw budget cuts. You know, to an already very small arts budget, and I suppose then you're left to kind of explain to people why there isn't enough money for X, Y, and Z, even though it would have been uh, not yourself that would have voted for these cuts. So it was difficult, but there were some big moments as well. Where the St. Patrick's Day and Riverfest having fireworks, bringing people into the city centre and seeing, you know, live performances take place around Limerick and great atmosphere. And it's hard to think it was so long ago when that took place, and it's been so long since any of that has happened. Hopefully again soon. Hoping that Riverfest takes place the next bank holiday weekend. You know, I think we're far enough out to be hopeful at the moment. I think my own opinion is that I wouldn't hold out too much hope for the rest of the year, and that's my own opinion.
oh,
I
for you
can't.
mean for the October weekend we're talking about now, the October weekend.
I don't know. I still don't know. I've heard 2 more weeks so many times at this stage now. You know that
I
it
know.
it's hard to stay to get hopeful for this side of Christmas. You know, that I'd be hopeful come next year. We'll see live performances. We'll see, pretty for myself, book signings. You know, because even still, you know, there aren't the public events in bookshops that generate a lot of our revenue.
That's
Um,
right.
and we see, and I think wrongfully so, that President Higgins was called out for not having a mask while he was in a bookshop, and I think that does a lot of damage to the industry and puts a lot of people on edge. That, you know, are they going to be called out? Because if I'm in a bookshop, you know, and they want to take a photo, I've no bother taking a mask off. That's my own opinion. You know, that's all he did was take a mask off for a photo, and with such
I
a
know,
ring
yeah. I
made
agree
out of
with
it,
you. Yeah,
you know.
that petty carry on destroys the spontaneity. Of course, you take your mask off for a photograph, for God's sake. But I mean, why would you leave it on, for God? I know what you mean, and then they're called out. These things, the signings. I spoke to Shifra O'Donovan last year. She brought out a book on the centenary of the killing of Kevin Barry.
Mm.
Till hell freezes, and she was making the same point about doing the book signing, going on meeting people and chatting to people and all of that. It creates a nice momentum for your book, you know.
Mm.
After all, that's what it's about: is to get the word out, get the book out to as many people as possible who are interested in reading it. You know, there's a cracking read, that book anyway. You know, but she's the grandniece, of course, of Kevin Barry.
Mm.
Shifra, who wrote the book, you know, and I found out it's like any books, any history books. But I must certainly look into from Glencar to Glentown. That piqued my interest now, preparing for the program. So I must have a look around now. I presume the bookshops are still open. I presume you can go into them, can you?
Oh yeah, no, bookshops are still open, and authors are going in with signing copies. It's just the signing events. they thought it would use to generate, I suppose, a bit of media attention and, you know, to be able to personalize signings as well, rather than just a name signed on the book, which is limited to at the moment. But yeah, bookstores are all open at the moment and eager for a bit of business. So definitely they'll all be open to call into.
Well, there's no doubt, Shane, before we finish, a debut novel is The Half Mile Road, and we may see his picture up in the poster again, as you heard it here first on LiR Confidential, down the line, we don't know. But Séighin O'Ceallaigh, we wish you all the best with the novel, your debut novel, The Half Mile Road, and you can certainly give us a call when it is out, and we will do promotion on our own website, our own web pages for you. And we're happy to do that anytime. But for this edition of LiR Confidential on LiRmedia.tv, from our special guest, Séighin O'Ceallaigh. Until we meet again, Séighin, as I said, I wish you all the best. The Half Mile Road listeners again for one more time. And you won't be bored, and you might be inspired to visit the place. Séighin, thank you very much for coming in this morning to the studio to chat to us, and we wish you all the very best. Until we meet again, Slán Pat.
Slán Pat. Garmíl Magat.
Tó féin.